Well, Mozart made it up, unless you got from something else. It's called extemporaneous. Oh, well. We're still talking about private property, and let me just go back and remind you, the class, the reason for this class is number one. There are tools to know truth. I don't care what they've told you in the world, there are ways to know truth. If there weren't ways to know truth, we wouldn't be sitting here in air-conditioned comfort with lighting, right? I mean, there's obviously truth. So there are tools to know truth. That's self-evident also. And the tools we already defined: scientific method, legal historical method, and logic. And so we use those tools to define reality. That's the way science works, that's the way history works, that's the way everything works. So if you know the tools, that's a great thing. So number one, this class is about knowing the tools to know truth. And number two, we can take those tools and we can apply them to what things we know, and we can define what we can prove to be true. You can't prove everything to be true. We've learned that, right? But you can prove certain things are true. And then finally, from a Christian standpoint, if you can define truth, then you can use that. You can use it in a witness, you can use it to converse with people, to discuss things with people, and get them to the point where what you want to do, right? Express your opinions and be able to, from a Christian standpoint, win people for Christ or for the gospel. So, very utilitarian thing in my opinion, because this is the basis. When I teach the classes that I teach, usually in Greek, this is what I use. Except instead of looking at issues, I look at language and culture and history, and I apply the same principles to them. So remember, I tell you my classes in Greek classes, the class I teach on Greek documents, it's not about opinion. You shouldn't care what my opinion is, and I don't really care what your opinion is on, for example, a Greek word. The Greek word is a Greek word. There can be opinion about some delicacies of its meaning, some, very complex points, but those are well beyond, the scope of usually what we talk about. And likewise, the issues we're talking about, we can define a certain basis for fact, for truth, and that's what we've been doing. So I'm still on private property because if you haven't noticed, private property is a very important issue. I mean, we've been through sexual issues, we've been through the issues of life and health kind of issues. And if you remember, in all of those issues, a lot of it comes down to, for example, who pays in health issues. It's not usually an issue of defining life or defining science or defining, what is right or wrong. It's defining who pays for it, right? Is it right to keep a person on a ventilator for 100 years? Even if you can't. Well, the issue is who pays. I mean, we could keep everybody who dies on a ventilator, right, for 100 years, and they'll still be breathing, the blood will still be pumping. Maybe they're still alive, kind of ish, right? But the question is, who pays for it? And then, of course, the ethical issue, the ethics are the next step. We're not talking about ethics, but what would ethics ask in that case? What's an ethical question in the terms of keeping someone on a respirator for 100 years?
What's the quality of life?
Their value of life, is their value...
Who turns the machine off?
Is it right to do it?
Is it right to do it? Excellent, that's right. That's the question. You see, we can even define, who does it? Well, I'd be willing, that's okay with me. Or we could say, what's quality? Quality of life we can't measure. That's an impossible measure. The quality of life of the person who's on the ventilator, who knows? The quality of life of the person outside, well, I feel better if you keep them alive. But the real issue is it right or wrong? See? And so, remember, this class isn't really delving into what's right or wrong. It's delving into what can we prove as true. See? For example, private property is neither right nor wrong. The existence of private property, well, it depends on which paradigm or construct, right? In the USSR, the legal construct of private property, who owns it?
The state.
The state. In the United States, well, after my, I took a case to the Supreme Court. Tammy and I took a case to the Supreme Court. She did most of the work. But we had a case that went to the Florida Supreme Court and Supreme Court of the United States. And because we lost our case, nobody in the United States owns private property. The state and the federal government has said that the sovereign right of the property in the United States belongs to the government, and they can, if they legislate it, that is, they vote it from you, they can do that without eminent domain, without paying you for it, without any compensation at all. That was the result of our case, which was Stop the Beach Renourishment versus the DEP. You can look it up, about 2 years ago. So because we lost our case in the United States, no one owns private property. Legally, depending on what your laws are, but we saw that private property is what? We can prove what about private property? It's a fundamental, not right. Right is something that's encapsulated in law, but it's fundamental in history and culture as something that people claim themselves. That is a natural, I guess you call it a natural right. That's probably not the right thing to say, although the Constitution does call private property a natural right. More likely it is, well, like I said before, take something from a toddler, and what is their reaction? Right? If I take your property from you, what's your reaction? And as a matter of fact, I'm going to talk about that a little bit today. In the Old Testament, what does God say?
I know.
You know! Teacher's pet, teacher's pet.
Curses a man who moves his neighbor's boundary stone.
Well, that's a good one, but he also says, thou shalt not steal, right? So, we'll talk about this. This is important. Purpose of government. What did we prove the purpose of government was?
To protect property.
And that is the only provable purpose of government. Remember, we can define the purpose of government legally whatever we want, right? But the only provable purpose of government is to protect private property. And we saw that in market and capitalism that, you know, remember, markets exist because private property exists. So if you have private property, then you will have markets, that is bartering back and forth. If you have, what do you have to have capitalism? Anybody remember?
Supply and demand.
Labor.
Invented in Lydia in 600 BC.
Money.
Money. You have to have money. The minute you have money, you have capital. Markets exist whether you're not. In other words, Dave and I would barter if we didn't have money, right? But because we have money, I can take that money, which represents my labor, and give it to him for product. So markets are natural. That's barter. Whenever you have monetary instrument, that is money, you have capitalism. So capitalism is natural. Yes?
In 600 BC, wasn't it pretty amazing that somebody was able to start persuading people to use money? Because after bartering for so long, all of a sudden they're saying, I have some coins for you, and they represent value, now give me your stuff. And I think it'd be hard psychologically for somebody to trade their stuff for a few coins.
Well, you know, it didn't spring fully armed from the mind of Zeus, like Athena. What happened with money is they went through a proto-money stage. There was proto-money. In the Old Testament, we get the bad, wrong, and present. There is no money in the Old Testament, guys. There's no money in the Old Testament. Shekels are weights of silver, generally. And where you find it in Judges, for example, where you find the first proto-money, is in Judges. And what they used, we believe, are sticks of silver that were weighted a certain weight. And so the value of the silver was equivalent to the value of the labor they represented, which means they are proto-money. Proto-money, by definition, means, like, for example, gold today is proto-money. Why?
Well, we don't freely trade it.
We don't have the gold standard.
Well, it has value though.
It has value based on weight, not value based on money. If you have a $20 gold piece, it's stamped $20. How much is that $20 gold piece worth? The weight. Yeah, several $1,000s, because it's the weight of the gold, not the mark. If they marked a gold as $3,000 or $1,000 gold piece and was little like that, then it would be money. See, that's the point of a dollar bill. You know, a dollar bill, and guess what? Our dollar bills used to be real money, because what could you turn them in for?
Gold.
Gold or silver. Not their weight in gold or silver. Their value in gold or silver currency. Because even then, gold or currency, you know, the point of gold and silver currency, it wasn't proto money, it was real money. But if I had a piece of gold, even if the gold lost the value of the gold as currency, what did it still have value as?
Money.
Weight in gold. That's the problem with pennies today. Copper pennies are worth more as copper than they are as pennies. You know? So in any case, that's, you know, this is that stuff, you know? Did you learn this in 6th grade? This is I'm not trying to insult you. They never taught me this in 6th grade either. But this is the stuff they should have, right?
Yeah.
Where does money come from? What's the worth of money? What was invented? Boy, this is really important stuff. How important is money? Pretty important, guys, right? I mean, in school, what do they shouldn't they be teaching about these very, very important subjects? Private property, what is the purpose of government? Guess what? They did. For years and years and years and years they did. Until 1833 we had public education in America, and until basically the change of the century, because we've already seen the world has changed because the world doesn't like a lot of the conclusions of facts. But we've talked about that before. In any case, let's look at, I want to mention something about taxes. And really I should have talked more about taxes last week, but I just want to mention this because this is very interesting, and this goes right into the Greek stuff that we've studied. If you looked at Luke 20, 21 through 26, and Matthew 22, 16 through 21, I'm going to tell you some of the stuff in the New Testament. I'm going to segue a little bit to New Testament stuff because we haven't been standing much in this, which is, not bad, but we've been touching other issues. But I wanted to mention this to you because, for example, in Luke 20, 21 through 26, you may remember it. It's about paying tribute to Caesar. Not taxes, tribute. The word in the Greek is tribute. So it says, is it right for us to pay tribute, not taxes, to Caesar or not? And this is what he said. He said, show me a denarius whose portrait and inscription are on it. A denarius is basically a Greek money, equivalent to it's a silver piece, equivalent to the labor of one person per day. Caesar, they replied, he said to them, give to Caesar what is Caesar, and to God what is God. Now, the biggest problem, the reason I want to mention this, it's also in Matthew 22, is because most people misinterpret this parable or this saying completely. Because first of all, you should ask yourself the question, what is God's?
Everything.
Now, you don't have to go in much proof because we can proof text that from the Old Testament. Because in Job 41, it says this. Job 41:11 says, who has a claim against me that I must pay? Everything under heaven belongs to me. This is God speaking. Okay. Let me go a little further before you get your aha moment. Because in Luke 23 it says this, 23, 1 through 3. The whole assembly rose and led him off to Pilate, that is Jesus. And they began to accuse him, saying, we have found this man subverting our nation. He opposes the payment of tribute to Caesar and claims to be Christ a king. So Pilate asked Jesus, are you the king of the Jews? And Jesus said, yes, it is as you said. Note, no one questions the accuracy of this accusation brought against Christ. Okay, let's look back at that little saying that Jesus said. Show me a denarius whose portrait and inscription are on it. Caesar's, they replied, and he said to them, then give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's. What belongs to God according to the Old Testament?
Everything.
And you already said that to me, right? So, should you give tribute to Caesar?
No.
No! Jesus' answer is a Greek paradox, a Greek irony. Because why would Jesus not say, don't pay tribute to Caesar? What would happen to him? They'd kill him right away. So, if he said, yes, pay tribute to Caesar, is there a problem there, too?
He's recognizing his authority.
Well, not only that, but if it's not true, let's look a little deeper on this. I mean, you should have an aha. First of all, when people tell you that Jesus says that you should give the government its due, that is not what it says in the New Testament. Jesus tells you that everything belongs to God, and therefore what belongs to Caesar?
Nothing.
There you go.
So what's tribute?
Tribute is the money. Taxes are different. I'm going to get to taxes right now in the New Testament. But tribute is the money you pay because you were defeated as a nation. In other words, it's the money that's being claimed by Caesar
Reparations.
as reparations. Yeah, basically reparations. That's closer. Reparations means usually you're paying back for a nation that was harmed or destroyed.
More like a vassal state.
Yeah, vassal state, where you're making claims on the value of that state because you've defeated them. And actually, it's you're saying, oh, well, I'll build you some viaducts or aqueducts, but you need to pay me, right? And of course, we know that didn't happen because where did Pilate take the money to build the aqueducts? From this temple treasury, which is really funny. But in any case, you notice that not even Pilate complains when they bring up and say to Jesus that he told us not to pay tribute to Caesar. Why?
He said, what you owe Caesar, you pay him, or what he is his, well, he doesn't owe anything, because everything's God's.
Well, not exactly. If you guys read my book, Centurion, you know exactly the answer if you go back and look to see what Pilate did. What was Pilate's biggest problem? What was all the procurators' biggest problem?
Collecting money.
Collecting tribute. Because nobody wanted to give it to them, and they didn't want to do it either, because what did they have to do? They had to hire guys like Matthew, right? Matthew, wringing people's arms and necks, give me your money, right? Tax collectors that they paid at a premium, right? The tax collectors would take more than the tax or tribute required. So there's a huge drain on the culture and the society anyway. So, Pilate didn't want to pay his tribute to Caesar either, because that was his biggest problem. That's why the Jews were constantly in uproar against him, was because, and he tried to do all kinds of things. The procurators tried to do all kinds of things to prevent having to go to the people and demand tribute from them. So they go to the rich. They go to, he went to Herod, right? You scam it off those guys and not off the people, because if you start doing it to the people, what do you have?
Revolution.
A revolution. Oh, wait a sec. We just started touching on something in the modern world. About taxes. We're going to see this in a second. So anyway, what you got to realize is that a lot of Jesus, and we talked about this in the Matthew class, a lot of what Jesus says are paradoxes or ironies in Greek, and they're really important. Other ones that are really neat to see. After Jesus, this is Matthew 17, 24, 27. After Jesus and his disciples arrived in Capernaum, the collectors of the 2 drachma tax came to Peter and asked, doesn't your teacher pay the temple tax? Temple tax. By the way, temple tax was prescribed by God. It was added back in Jehoshaphat's time. And remember, they were having problems with the temple tax because who was taking the temple tax? The priests were misusing the temple tax. Yes, he does, he replied. When Peter came to the house, Jesus was the first. Okay, this is first of all interesting. Does your teacher pay the temple tax? And Peter's answer? Yes, he does. He's lying because Jesus didn't. Because watch what Jesus says. Peter came to the house and Jesus was the first to speak. He didn't even ask him. He says, what do you think, Simon? From whom do the kings of the earth collect duty and taxes? From their own sons or others? In other words, from the people of their nation? Or do they take it from the nations they conquer? Right? Tribute. And Peter answers right away, from others. Then the sons are exempt, Jesus said to him. In other words, the citizens are exempt. The citizens of the nation are exempt. But so that we may not offend them, go to the lake and throw out your line. Take the first fish you catch, open its mouth. You'll find a 4 drachma coin. Take it and give it to them for my tax and yours. Now, I'm not going to dig into the Old Testament, but if we dug into the Old Testament far enough, what will we find about taxes?
So if a tribute is what a country that's conquered has to pay to the conquering, what's the definition of a tax?
Well, the modern definition of a tax is what the people pay for their government. And we're going to talk about that today, about what the purpose of government, about taxes. But the thing that I want to note with you is this. In the Old Testament, did anybody have to pay taxes?
Yes.
They were.
You're going to find out God's a supply sider with Egypt.
And as a matter of fact, if you look, the place where you find taxes, I can't go around time, but Jeremiah, Nehemiah, Ezra, Nehemiah, that's when they were taxing. And remember, if you remember the class we had in Malachi, where I talked about Ezra, Nehemiah, was God happy with it? He was completely unhappy with it because they were plundering the people. Because in the Old Testament, there are no taxes. In every case, they always ask the people to give money. And in many cases, in a feudal state. In a feudal state, how do you get the money if you're king? From your nobles. And how they get their money? They get their money from their feudal estates. So it's a feudalistic system. I don't have time to go into great detail on the Old Testament tax system, but let's just say it's nothing like our impression of taxes and spending in this country. So it's just important to note that, number one, in the New Testament, Christ says, who pays the taxes?
Others.
Others, not your citizens. And in the Old Testament, this is true too. So if you want a pronouncement by God, there it is. And that's within this New Testament, Old Testament context. Yeah.
What did they, like we pay our taxes for highways, roads, Social Security, things like that. What did they pay, what did they say that they used their taxes for back then?
Almost in every case in the ancient world, taxes were only procured for warfare. And we're going to find out why. If you think about it, you'll see the connection right away. I think I'm going to skip. I'm going to mention less than 5 minutes about gambling. I want to talk about gambling really quickly because it's an issue in Kansas. This is what I want to show you about gambling. This is called a normal distribution. If I don't have coins in my pocket. Nobody carries coins anymore, do they? If I had a coin and I flipped a coin, whenever I flip it, what kind of distribution do I get? A normal distribution. And it'll be heads or tails, right? And if I flip it enough, probability says that there will be a 50% chance, right, of it. Now, for example, Kansas Lottery. Kansas Lottery is a great example. Poker, there's no other games that are any better. For example, if you pay the cash and odds of winning, and I have a lot of examples, but I'll just give you one. Match 5 BB odds 1 in 2 million. I'm rounding. Match 5 odds 1 in 100,000. Match 4 odds 1 in 18,000. Match 4 odds plus odds 1 in 700. Match 3 1 in 717. Match 3 1 in 30. Match 2 1 in 86. Match 1 1 in 29. Overall odds of a win in this game in the Kansas Lottery is 1 in 12. If it were this kind of odds, what would it be?
50-50.
1 in 1. Right? Okay, this is government-controlled lottery. Now, this is not any different than a casino either. And by the way, the law says you have to give the odds on everything. Now,
wouldn't it be 1 and 2 on the coin flip?
Is it 1 and 2?
1 out of 2, yeah.
What?
50%.
Every
50%.
second time, yeah.
Okay, 1 and 2. Well, this is a ratio. Well, I guess it's close enough. All right. Anyway, every time, what's your chance of winning with a coin?
50%.
50%. What's your chance of winning in Kansas Lottery?
8%.
12%.
Terrible. Terrible. My point is this. God, okay, this you can prove. Who invented the normal distribution?
It's inherent in our universe.
Yeah, God did. All right, science. It's science-based. If you're going to be fair in gambling, what should be the distribution? If you're fair.
50-50.
Well, are you telling me the government's not fair?
Yes.
And the government allows people to control, a gambling that doesn't give you a 50-50. My point is simply this. If gambling were fair, what would be the ratio of odds? It'd be equal, right?
Wait, it doesn't always have to be equal if the paths differ, right?
If the
Your expected values have to be fair.
Risk reward.
So if you have a 1 in 100 chance of winning 100 times your wager, you have to take both factors into account.
Well, see, I would disagree with that, and the reason I disagree with that is because Yes, you know, this is the argument for unregulated. For example, an argument for unregulated gambling, which I don't have a problem with gambling. I'm not trying to give you an ethical argument against gambling. What I'm trying to do is say, what can I prove about gambling? And what you say may make sense, okay? But it begins to become, now when I start going there, what do I start touching on? Ethics and opinion. For example, you say that you'll accept a 1 in 100 odd if the value of the gamble, you know, if I give $1 and I could win $100, right?
Exactly.
You use, and see.
And then I won't get that deal from the government either.
Well, yeah, you're not gonna get that deal from the government, that's exactly right. But do you see this? Now see, this becomes an issue of opinion. I stated that I can prove, for example, normal distribution, that's normal in the universe. And this other idea is what? It's an extension, see? And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I'm not trying to argue whether gambling is right or wrong. But I would argue that unregulated gambling is okay because what?
Free exchange.
It's a free exchange, as long as we know the odds, you know?
And what may be gambling for one is simply hedging or
Entertainment.
creating, well, not even that. I'm saying if you're, it may be insurance for somebody else, if you're talking about commodities.
Well, no, commodities are not gambling, and that's market-based. That is a thing we gotta get out of our minds, okay? Gambling and market-based are totally different things. People may take a gamble on the market if they have no knowledge. That's different. That's a different use of the word gamble, isn't it? See, the use of the word gamble I'm using is when I take money, for example, in a game of chance. Is a market a game of chance?
No.
No, it isn't. It isn't a game of chance. We think it can be. Our brains are deluded. We've been culturally fed a bunch of gunk, right?
Yeah, farming is a gamble.
Farming is not a gamble, is it?
No, but they call it that.
But you can't control it. But that's not a gamble. A gamble is, one definition of a word of gamble is something, is, you know, making a bet on something you can't control or taking a risk on something you can't control. But I do that whenever I drive my car. Am I gambling?
Yeah.
Well, in some definitions, you see this? This is exactly right. The problem in English is we have these words that have so many meanings. And what we're talking about, and that's why this logic, the point of logic, is in logic we make a definition. So I agree with you 100%. But I'm just telling you that one thing I can prove about gambling is the only fair gamble, the only fair is too much, the only equitable, perfectly equitable way I can prove gambling is a 50-50. Now, you argue, and I don't disagree, that perhaps a 1 in 100 is good if it's a 1 in 100 bet, but you're not going to get that, right?
No.
That's not, because that's not the way it works. It's going to be a 1 in a million for 100, right? I don't play the lottery. Don't hold up your hands. In my opinion, the lottery is for people who don't understand math or who are stupid. Okay? It's like taking your money and throwing it in the trash can, okay, in the toilet. And it's also a tax. Who's it a tax on?
Stupid.
The poor. Because generally the poor are uneducated and are not taught these things. This is something they should be teaching in school, but they don't teach it. In other words, I only want to take a second on gambling because I want to move to even more important subjects. I just thought, you know, I had mentioned this last week in the notes, and I thought it was an important thing. I got all kinds of Powerball stuff. Let's talk about private property. Let's look at man's law and private property. And by the way, how does gambling fit into private property?
You wager it to win.
You're wagering your private property in a bet to win. Okay? And so see this? Private property has interconnections within all